So I'll introduce the panel now. We have Pam Harding from Tennis Victoria, Mara Mason from Moreland City Council, Matt Cameron from VicHealth, and there's also Erica in the background. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A function and we'll get to as many of those as possible. So the first question, we'll use the poll to come up with our top 3 answers. See if we can get that up. There we are. So the first question for the panel is on the barriers for participants returning to club sport that our viewers are most worried about. The top responses there, you can see fear of getting sick as the number 1, cost of sport 40%, and change in values, i.e. prefer to spend time doing something else now at 43%. So Tam from Moreland, we'll start with you. What solutions or ideas do you have to combat these top 3 concerns?
Grant, the irony of fear of getting sick when we're talking about hotspots, and Moreland is one of them, but unfortunately that's not something I can address tonight. One of the things I think we should talk about is the fact that a lot of sporting clubs out there in the community offer traditional sport. And I think when I look at the options available for people these days and what they're looking for, they may not be looking for traditional sport. And it's probably best described, Tom, in a little diagram that'll hopefully pop up on your screen very shortly. To me, traditional sport is you train, you pay fees, you play competitively, there's a presentation night, etc. A lot of sporting clubs offer the opportunity for their community to sit in that fourth circle there, traditional sport. And I think the research is telling us that people want more of a social sport opportunity. They want something that's less competitive. We know that one in 3 women believe that a sporting club is not welcoming for women like them, which is kind of concerning really when that's majority, 51% of our population. So I guess I'd like the audience to have a think about, if your club only offers traditional sport, have a think about what that might mean for you post-COVID and from 2021 onwards. Thinking about things like how your club could offer a coffee and a kick, or a prattle and a paddle, or a smash and chat, something like that. You get the idea, I guess, that you want people to be social. The membership structure, I guess, is what people talk about as a challenge in sport, that, well, we need people to be members of our club. But the research is showing us that people are turning away from that and they want this social aspect. So it's not to say they can't be social members of your club, but the concept of training twice a week, 3 times a week, and then playing competitively on the weekend may not be what everyone's looking for, especially women. So if we've got social sport offerings out there, soccer mums, AFL 9s, rock up netball, you name it, I think we're going to see a greater uptake of people in the community getting back into sport. It may not just be in the traditional format that we've always seen it.
Tam from netball. Matt, do you have any further comments on that?
Yeah, it's Tam from tennis here. Sorry, no.
Tennis.
That's okay. Look, I think particularly around that change in values, and Tam's hit the nail on the head in terms of that social aspect. So I think it's going to be really important for clubs to be clear about what they can offer and how they can offer it, and perhaps how they're doing things differently. But also back to those, I suppose, the core principles of this is it's asking your constituents, what is it that you're wanting? What is it that you need from us to overcome that fear of turning up to the club, or perhaps being involved in our sport and what we do, and how we've perhaps offered it in the past. So I think if you can start to ask those questions of your members and of those who have traditionally participated, then perhaps you can start to look at different ways and start this whole co-design process, even with how you traditionally offer your sport.
Matt, how do you think we can combat the fear of getting sick in this current environment?
Yeah, thanks, Grant. And I agree with everything that's been said already. And I guess, firstly, at VicHealth, we obviously sympathise with community sport clubs that have had their seasons cancelled or had their plans for the year postponed or disrupted. We know there's lots of volunteers and administrators working really hard to try to adapt to some really trying circumstances. I think over the past 2 months, I've probably heard 2 main schools of thought around that question. So one is the concern that people that may have had time away from sport may not want to come back, and it might just be because they're concerned about the risk of getting sick, or their families getting sick, or they're appreciating the free time that's now in their lives, or for whatever reason that might be. The flip side is probably the optimistic view that we might see some built up demand out there in the community. So people that haven't been able to play, they want to get out there and play, they want to get out there and hang out with their mates. And that's something that we might not see immediately, but something that we might see over the next 12 months or so. The reality is that those two things probably aren't mutually exclusive, and both are probably true to some degree. And I think something we've obviously found through our research with La Trobe and other research as well is just that people are really, really complicated. People are unpredictable, so we don't know. And I think that's where principle one is obviously really important. Focusing on communication to just build a better understanding of what people are after. So I think it's something that we can't really know the answer to that question immediately. It's something that will evolve over time. I think the other thing around, I know one of the points on there was around cost. I do think in the uncertain circumstances we're in, there could be a risk that people are more conservative with their buying and purchasing habits. So that might mean that people are looking for less commitment from a financial point of view. It might mean that the fee structures in place in many clubs are kind of counter to what some people might be looking for. So it could mean that we need to consider some alternatives around more pay-to-play options, more flexible payment options as well.
Tam from tennis, what are some of the ways that you've reached out to club members and potential participants to engage them in co-design? Do you have some examples?
Yeah, I think the example that we probably started pre-COVID was around our Tennis for Teens program. So we started off with using the insights that VicHealth had provided us around that target audience. And of course, they gave us that sort of first inkling about what are the types of things that we need to be looking at and what perhaps might be some of the core principles of the product that we needed to create. So that gave us a really good start to the process. But then the next part was actually talking to that and contextualising it for our sport and making sure that we were able to overlay it with how our sport runs and the types of activities we might have on offer. So that's when we started to bring in that co-design process of actually speaking with the participants, but not only with the participants, with the coaches and with the community groups around what it is that they might need from that program. And from that, we came up with this, and of course we piloted it, which we do a lot for these sort of programs. With that, we came up with a set of core principles that were common regardless of where we ran that program, that were sort of almost became those non-negotiables that the participants told us that they needed. But we also realised that, going back to Matt's point earlier, that we're dealing with people that want different things from different things. So we basically said to our clubs with this program that, okay, we have some core principles, we know what it is the participant wants, but we want to continue this co-design. And part of our program now is that the kids that are involved are actually the ones that design what happens on a week-to-week basis. Yes, we provide them with some guidance around that so that there is some structure there should and if they need it. But they are asked what it is that they want on a weekly basis, and things get adjusted accordingly. So it becomes this continual cycle of improvement. And while it might mean that in one case, what our Tennis for Teens program might be in Point Lonsdale, for instance, might be very different from what it is at the Coburg Tennis Club, but that's okay. That's what the kids are wanting. And so therefore they're still engaged, they're still all operating under that co-principle, and they're more likely to continue. In actual fact, we found that the retention rate of that program is around the 65 to 70% because they're getting what they want out of it.
Yeah, that's excellent. Matt and Tam from Moreland, do you have anything more to add onto that co-design examples?
Yeah, I mean, it's in our role at VicHealth, I guess we're hearing a lot of stories coming through in terms of what might be happening out there in the community. So, and I think when you boil principle one of doing sport differently down to its kind of simplest form, it's just around listening to people, talking to people and learning as much as we can just to understand how people are feeling. And I think there's some really practical ways we can do this. I know a lot of clubs are using surveys and Facebook and other ways to engage with their members. One of the favourite stories I've heard over the last few months is around how some clubs have had to evolve and adapt through coronavirus. So VicHealth provided Mordialloc Motor Yacht Club with an active club grant late last year. They were intending to do some stand-up paddleboarding classes for women in their local community. They got their first session underway. They had a great session, had a great time, and that's when the restrictions then came in to stop their program. And John from the club reached out to us in late April to let us know that they really wanted to keep this group of women engaged in the club, and they reached out to that group, the participant group, to discuss, what can they do. They couldn't do the classes as they were doing. So they ended up running some online yoga sessions with that group of participants. So obviously really diversifying what that club does compared to doing sailing and stand-up paddleboarding. But they did that in direct response to that feedback, and that was really about keeping that group of participants engaged with each other. So you had this group of people that had come together for that first session. They didn't want to lose those people and they wanted to keep them connected to each other, kept up morale of those people as well in terms of the potential to continue within physical activity, kept the group of participants engaged with the club, provided an opportunity for that club to respond to demand in terms of something that was outside what that club normally offers, but something that the people wanted to do. And also means that longer term, they've got this group of women that they can potentially re-engage, whether that's in stand-up paddleboarding or sailing down the track. So I think there's probably a whole range of other examples out there in terms of how clubs are doing this across the state. And I think we're probably all hearing about them to some degree, but it's something that potentially we can all share much more, which other clubs can certainly learn from.
Yeah, I think for me, the simple thing to do is just ask, and ask people, women, girls, family members, friends. We've had clubs door knocking, we've had clubs sending out member surveys. We've had clubs asking us, asking their state sporting association, asking the national body, looking around at other states as well and seeing what's happening, over in WA or New South Wales. And asking people what they want is one thing. Being able to deliver it is something else. And I think the reality is you've got to meet somewhere in the middle, because a lot of things changed, in 10, 20 years of sport, and we've got to get a bit more creative. So while it might sound really challenging, I liked in the video the section that talked about get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's the reality, is that you might need to ask some hard questions of your club presidents or your club coaches, or the dad that's been coaching that under 14 girls team for 3 or 4 years. If things aren't working, ask the hard question, why? Why aren't the girls coming back? Why aren't they having fun? And be prepared to sit with that answer and then be prepared to address it. Because it sounds like, we're probably making it out to be really quite simple when you're sitting around looking at a screen talking about it. But having the hard conversations, I think, will hold your club in good stead going forward.
Yeah, that was a big takeaway for me as well, just to be able to put yourself out there and ask the questions and hopefully get the feedback necessary to move to the next step. Matt, what's your advice for clubs that are returning from COVID? What's important in terms of trying to re-engage people back to the clubs, or even getting new people into the clubs?
Yeah, I certainly agree with Tam around social sport. Social sport's been a big focus for VicHealth over recent years, and we recognise that social sport programs might not be for all clubs, but they might be an option for some clubs, and might be a good time to consider introducing a social sport program that might be less structured and more flexible to engage people. I wonder, with restrictions continuing to evolve, if some people might be more willing to get out there and get active in a social sport program at the moment than they might be in a traditional sport offering. Just less time at the club, less contact with surfaces, etc. within the club, potentially less people involved as well. So it might be timely to think about a social sport program and whether that might be an option at this point in time. So VicHealth is working with many state sporting associations around introducing social sport programs, of which Tam from Tennis is leading one of those at Tennis Victoria. So each of those SSA, state sporting associations, is working on return to play strategies as well. So I'm sure we could share those organisations we're working with, and it might be a chance for those clubs in those sports to reach out and potentially trial something different. Another story I've heard, which is probably more around volunteers than it is around participants lately, but the regional sports assemblies that are out there talking to regional clubs every day in their communities. And I've heard a lot of great examples of club committees making sure they're reaching out to the people around the club that might not even be officially volunteers, but the people that do all those jobs around the club that are there week in, week out. People that might work on the scoreboard, they might open the gates, they might open the club rooms, they might pack up all the equipment. I know there's a lot of clubs out there that are concerned about those people because their weekly routines have been changed, disrupted. They could have been doing this for 15 years at the club. So lots of great stories of committee members sitting down, writing a list of all those people at the club that are there all the time and making sure they just do, you know, the real simple thing of picking up the phone and checking in on them and seeing how they're going. I think we know that sport's really important for physical activity outcomes, but very, very important for mental wellbeing and social connection outcomes as well. So I think sport is a major opportunity for people to connect with others, and that's been taken away from people as well. So I think that's something that will not only benefit those people in terms of being reached out to, but potentially make them feel more connected and then therefore come back when they can.
Got a question for the two TAMs.
Okay.
I might, I'll just interrupt here. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can from the Q&A. Erica is answering a few in the background as well, so make sure you've got that window open. But Adam from Darebin has a question for the two TAMs. What do you both think the role of LGAs and SSA should be or could be in terms of supporting clubs to do sport?
I can start if you like. Look, I think the one thing that is really important in all of this is partnerships and bringing in all the different stakeholders to have that conversation as well. So the more people you have around the table, I suppose the more insights that you get, the more views that you get, the better off we will all be. There'll be ways to connect that we wouldn't have worked out as a sport to connect. And it's interesting, Tam and I have been doing a project with our broader teams just exactly around that. And the thing was, we were looking to engage more Muslim women in tennis, and we had a tennis club who really wanted to. We wanted to as a sport. Obviously, Moreland City Council wanted that to happen, but we needed the linchpin being VicHealth, who had that connection into that community. So, you know, it's very much a partnership, and we can't do what we do without it. If we think we can do this alone, then, you know, we're not going to get there. So I think the role is extremely important. It's bringing all of those cohorts together to come up with the best solution to create that design and then actually to be able to implement something that has more sustainability as a result too.
Yeah, absolutely. Councils, regardless of where they are in the country, are more than just roads, rates and rubbish bins. We have humans on the ground, and probably more of them actually, now that the state sporting associations have been gutted by some of the COVID cuts. So I'd encourage you strongly to reach out, make the phone call, send the email to your recreation team and to your sport team at council, and get them to have the conversation with you. You know, you might want to argue with them about other things, but there's genuinely good people there that want to see your facility activated. They want to help you put more lights in. They want to help you make the grass look beautiful and pristine. They want to help you get what you need to operate your sport or your physical activity. So it's really important for us at council to know what you're up to and try and work with you to do that. And as Tam said, you know, we've had some really great relationships with our health partners, with state sporting associations, with local businesses, just from that original conversation, sitting around a table and saying, hey, this is what we want to do and how can we do it? Councils don't always say no. And as I said, we do have money that we can share with the community to help you out. So yeah, reach out, and our friends at the regional sporting associations as well are massive assets to their community. So reach out to them too.
We've got a question from Bridget. Erica did answer this one in the background, but I'm keen to pass it on to the participants, to the guest panel as well. Do you think sports should offer incentives to people to give their time to co-design?
Tam, did you want to talk about what you did with tennis?
Yeah, I will actually. So actually part of the Tennis for Teens program and what we've been able to use part of our funding with VicHealth is to actually provide funding to those clubs to be able to have those conversations and try some of these things. So there's a grant that is attached to running it. So yes, there's some funding that goes towards them to engage people to run it. But there's also funding to help implement some of those things that perhaps aren't part of that core principle that group needs to get things up and running to begin with. So I think that's really important, that seed funding, and I know a lot of grants are around that. I know the VicHealth Active Club grants, etc., around providing that seed funding. But we know it's going to work because it's been created with the insights and the co-design. So it's really just helping the implementation part of the process. So, and that's helping it reduce those barriers even further to participation. So, and look, that's not always possible. And at the minute that's possible because we do receive funding from VicHealth, but it doesn't always have to be monetary. It can also be just that connection with others and connection with the partners, etc. So it's not always necessarily that, but yes, that is an option as well.
We might finish with this last question. If you could give one piece of advice to attract a volunteer and hopefully retain them, what would that be? We know how important volunteers are to grassroots sport, so how do we get them in and retain them?
Okay, I'll lead the batting. I would flip it on its head and look at the club and what are you offering for that volunteer to stick around? So what is it that you do? What's the environment you create? When they scroll down your social media pages, if they scroll 3 times, what do they see? When they walk past your pavilion, what do they see? When they see your logo on a jumper at a sporting club or at a supermarket, what do they see? What's the impression they get about your club? Because everyone's got skills. So I would ask, what's the vibe you're giving out? I can't believe I used the word vibe. What's the vibe your club's giving out to the community? And what would make that person stay? Because sometimes it's less about them and it's more about what you're offering the community.
And I think it's also being really clear about what you want them to do and some timeframes around it. And I think, we have to look at and unpack volunteering to just be linked to positions on a committee. We need to look at different ways in which we can engage people. And if they want to be able to give us time, that's a week, that's a few hours, whatever it happens to be, then it's about matching up those people with the skills and what you need to do. But once again, the co-design, go back and ask. It's asking your members and it's asking the people in the community, we need help with this, can you help? And if it's defined and there's some parameters around it, people will more than willing to put up their hand. But it's, it's turning it into, I suppose, tasks rather than actually making it a position, which can be quite daunting for people.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar around, having very, very specific roles. I think, the lives that we're all living in terms of being quite busy, I think people that might be looking to volunteer will be looking for potentially something that's quite specific and quite tailored to what they want to do. So it might be around having specific roles for specific people in terms of what they can do and how they can support the club. I think the other thing is just around thinking best about how that club might be able to provide a sense of belonging and sense of social connection for those people. So one of the great things about sport in terms of why people volunteer is that sense of belonging. So yes, it might be that they love that particular sport, but it's probably also around what does that club offer them in terms of connecting up with other people and feeling part of something.